and understanding the psychosocial aspect of our situation, our conditions, is arguably a large component of the story when we're dealing with complex conditions. So we call this the biopsychosocial, and I can put those into ratios. So the biological is usually the smallest thing. So we can have biological problems in our bodies. We can have headaches. We can have back pain. We can have knee pain. But if you're in a positive psychosocial environment, that's quite manageable. If you're in a poor psychosocial environment, that becomes really unmanageable and really distressing over time. And that compounds.
Okay, so Alex Kovats, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
Why don't you describe what you're doing currently with your life and what are some of your biggest achievements?
Okay, so right now, I've been an exercise physiologist for 3 years. Before that, I was a personal trainer and massage therapist. But right now I'm dealing with some pretty complex clients with musculoskeletal conditions, usually pain, but the pain that hasn't gone away from everyone else's treatment. So they tend to find their way to me. At the same time, I'm doing a master's by research, about to convert that into a PhD by research, and that's looking at preventing osteoarthritis. So that's quite a novel thing at the moment. Not many people have looked at preventing it. It's all been in how do you modify it once you've got it. Outside of that, so I'm reaching crazy levels of success in my practice right now. So I'm going to have to bring someone else on soon. I just don't have enough time in the day, and I've got more and more clients signing up at the moment. It's crazy. What else? Personally, happy and healthy relationship for over 10 years with my lovely partner. She's seen me through thick and thin, and I attribute a lot of my success to her patience with me as well. And then just lastly, performing multiple martial arts, currently a second dan in Goju-Ryu karate, judo, and boxing at the same time. Absolutely loving it.
You've told me you have a pretty interesting life story, and I want to start with your parents. So your dad was fleeing war-torn Europe, migrated to Australia. Why don't we start with that experience, how he met your mum, and then go into the institutional abuse from your mother's side. Yeah.
So my dad wasn't actually fleeing. He was in utero as his family was fleeing.
Oh, right.
He had an older sister. And as they were fleeing, it was in Hungary during the Hungarian Revolution against the Russians. So it wasn't World War II, but it was a fallout from World War II. And as they were fleeing, I think my aunt, so his sister, got hit by something. I'm not too sure, that it's a bit fuzzy on the details. They all safely arrived in Australia. PTSD, of course, right? And then once they're in Australia, my dad's born. They buy up in the eastern suburbs when no one wanted to be here. It was cheap as chips. And the Europeans came over with work ethic, and they worked their butts off. And then they decided to take my aunt to hospital to get the whatever damage was done repaired. She ended up having a whole lot of infection. I think it was Hep B and polio at the time. And then she became a quadriplegic, and the family just fell apart from there. Like, it was nothing more than looking after the quadriplegic aunt or sister. And my dad just grew up on TV dinners trying to support himself and teach himself. So it was chaos, right? That lasted until he was in his teens. And then after that, I think there was about 10 years of relative peace. And then everyone else started getting sick and passing away. So then it was his dad, then it was his mum. But before all that, my dad met my mum, and that was in the mid 80s. So my mum's story before she met with my dad. Cool. This one's the doozy one, right? So my grandfather was born like late into World War II. So you can only imagine what that was. And they didn't have PTSD terms back then. I'm pretty sure they called it shell shock. And in reality, that's PTSD. So my grandfather grew up with that, having almost nothing, the Great Depression. My mum comes into the picture in the 60s now. And soon after, so my mum had an older sister by 3 or 4 years. Soon after my mum was born, my mum's mum passes away. So single father, 60s, 2 daughters, has no idea how to do it, has to work like multiple jobs. He ends up thinking, I'm going to put them into someone else's care, in which the institution started to abuse my mother physically, emotionally, sexually, you name it, she experienced it. She bounced between the institutions and home.
Alex, I know maybe you can't mention the institution, but what kind of institution was it? Like an orphanage?
So it was like how to explain it? Convent. So so religious orphanage, I guess, kind of thing. Yeah. So she's in the institution, bouncing between there and home. I think my grandfather remarries a couple times, and a few of those stepmothers were pretty horrible people as well. And so over those years, my mother had to go through a lot of that. I think they were only about 7 or 8 years old, and then my mother's sister died while they're in one of these institutions. Something to do with a brain aneurysm. Again, not 100% clear. And that continues on. I think it gets worse after that for my mum because she's alone, easier target at the moment. And then at the age of 16, my mum just beats the crap out of a few of the nuns and flees and becomes homeless for a few years, couch surfing. At the age of 21, she met my dad, and then, hey presto, I arrived.
Tell me about like how did your parents' difficult backgrounds sort of influence your upbringing and family dynamics?
So this is where I come into the picture. I don't think I was planned, but like they were in love, and it was just young love. They didn't know what trauma was and trauma bonding and all that kind of stuff. And then the best way I can describe it is almost the Romeo and Juliet. There were two families that just did not like each other. So I'm half Hungarian, half Australian, and the Hungarian side didn't like the Australians, and the Australians didn't like the Hungarians. So it was just this two sides of the family just against each other. And there wasn't really much in the way of easily accessible therapy. And even if there was accessible therapy, no one understood what it was, and there was a horrible stigma around it. So no one ever really dealt with that trauma. And I consider that all that happened to my parents like a capital T trauma. And then what got passed down onto me was that intergenerational trauma, which is like a lowercase t trauma.
Explain that to me. Capital T trauma.
Yeah. So like the big trauma, the actual stuff that happened to people. Like I didn't get abused, but I got raised by two people that went through a crazy amount of shit. So it didn't happen directly to me, but it got passed down to some level. So that's what, late 80s when that started. That's when I was born. And then that's what I called the chaos years. They were like, the next 4 years of my life was just my parents trying to figure out if they're going to be together, what they're going to do, how they're going to move forward. They ended up getting divorced when I was about 2 years old, splitting up. And then my mom was traveling all around. So I'm still in the building that my family had from the eastern suburbs before. But my mom started trying to escape and move around, started in the eastern suburbs. Then it moved up to the Blue Mountains of Sydney. And then by the age of 4, it was just absolute chaos from my memory. I was just trying to figure out which way was up. And my mum ends up with my sister in far northern New South Wales in the middle of the rainforest trying to just be, I guess.
And where were you?
I was in Sydney still. And I remember at the age of 4, I was given the option as to which parent I wanted to stay with for a short time. That's ingrained into my memory.
Bit of a decision for a 4-year-old. And I'm surprised you remember that. I don't remember anything from when I was 4.
So I don't remember much else, but there are some very key moments that feel like they're clear as day. But I also know that when one goes through those like traumatic emotional events, it can get a bit skewed. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt, right?
So what happened after 4? Did you end up going living with her?
So from this point, I think I bounced around between my mum and my dad for a couple months to maybe a year. This is where the timeline gets a little bit iffy, right? When you bounce around from family to family, it gets muddled. And so I stayed with my dad. I remember kindergarten, I was at one point near Orange, and then I was back in kindergarten in Sydney. And then year 1, 2, and 3, I was with my dad. But there may have been 1 or 2 moments where I lived with my mum for a few weeks. And then from year 4 onwards, so I think I was, about 8 years old by that point, I went and lived in far northern New South Wales with my mum in the middle of the rainforest.
So what like in a what, like in a house, or like,
yeah,
is it like
community,
or what are those things called?
A commune.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was
Commune.
definitely a hippie commune. So my mum also has epilepsy, so
Yep.
she didn't drive. No real sense of income, and we lived in like an hour's drive outside of the local town. So yeah, we're at the mercy of like other people helping out a bit. The hippie commune was a lot of fun, very different. I consider myself like back then I was like a young Tarzan jumping from tree to tree, having fun, grabbing mandarins off the mandarin orchard. The rules were when we weren't at school was be home before dark.
Okay, so there was a school. There was a school out there, or is it part of in the commune? Okay, so how old were you when you were here?
So this is when I hit about 8 years old. Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, a rough estimate is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, because of the bouncing around, I'm just trying to set which memory I'm thinking of. So I'm pretty sure in the early stages of that, I was at the local school on the hippie commune, which didn't have to follow an actual syllabus. So I remember it was like math class and I was coming from the city school and like all smart and get ready to go. And they're like, yeah, just go to the library and do whatever you want for math. I was like, all right. So, okay, that's what it is. Sure. So for the next 2 years, so I think it was like end of year 4 up until middle of year 6, I just bummed around in the rainforest. And to be honest, I got into a fair bit of mischief. I was a pretty angry kid at that point. And there was a bit of trauma that happened to me. I won't go into that. That's a bit of a locked page. But other than that, like I think that might have even been the triggering point for me to get angry because I didn't feel safe. Yeah, so I was a young boy without a father at that point because my dad was in Sydney working his ass off trying to keep this building from collapsing. We'll get into that in a moment. And yeah, so I just felt like I was on my own at that point. I want to go into all the positive stories. There are a lot of positive stories living in the rainforest, right? So my ability to feel safe within myself can be taken back to that, both on a majority on a physical level. Like when you're running around watching out for snakes and spiders and need to feed yourself for a day because your mum's off doing something else and there's no food in the house, you got to find food around. I mean, there was sugar cane that we could go and break open and eat. There was stuff you could pull out of the ground fresh and just eat. Like, so there were all these other benefits that you don't get if you live in a city, right? I mean, maybe if you go to a good school that has like a little garden out the back, you get to experience, but this was like right in the middle of it. And I mean, to really paint the picture of the commune that we lived in, it was like a metal A-frame house that we knew there was a diamond python in the ceiling. And that's what ate the rats. That's what kept the rats away. But there was only like 12-volt power, so no electricity, enough to run a light bulb, pretty much. And that was on a grid for the whole community.
Okay, and then what happened? Yeah, so you were living in the commune. So you said it had a good and bad effect on your identity.
So I was not just identity, but I was developmentally delayed. I didn't have any school to follow, really. It was, it's interesting. I just wish there was a bit more of formal schooling where you went there and you knew what you had to do. You went home, you did your homework, that kind of stuff. So
how many years would you say then you didn't really go to school?
Well, I mean, year and a half at least of that.
Okay.
But in those years, those are fundamental formative years.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. So that kind of brings me to the end of being in the rainforest.
Yes.
Then I remember it was a little bit chaotic. My dad came up to visit at some point, and then my mum didn't want to come back. And as a young boy, I was like, oh, crap, I don't want to leave my dad. I don't want to be left behind by myself. So I'm going to go back to Sydney for a bit. And my dad obliged, and my sister followed me at this point. And then both of us now ended up back in Sydney at another school for 6 months only. And then we found ourselves back up in the northern New South Wales, but we weren't in the rainforest anymore. So it's probably at this point, this is probably the middle of my changes of schools. I changed schools probably 10 to 12 times, but some of those were repeats of the same school. Yeah. So the school that I came back to when I came back to Sydney was the same one that I left the 2 or so years prior. And it's very odd seeing familiar faces, but different people. Yeah. So I became outcast very quickly. I remember them trying to pull me in, but I probably resisted a whole lot as well, being uncertain as to who I was or what I wanted to be.
Yeah, you've talked about having like really poor intercommunity communication, and I'm just wondering, all this instability and relocating must have really really impacted, your sense of stability and self. I'm just wondering, how in the heck did you cope back then?
Well, anyone can cope with anything, right?
Well,
it's just
how do they do it, though?
Environment. Yeah, exactly. You just do. It's not a conscious effort. It's just, This is the environment I'm in, and this is how I'm going to adapt.
What was going through your head? Like, how did you
get through the next day?
Okay. It sounds like you had like a unique mindset. I'm interested in what your mindset was back then and how it's influenced your mindset now.
I would argue that I was fighting off a mindset that was there, that was instilled on me by my families. I always had this sense of I was the one to fix the family and hold it together, because if it wasn't for us kids, no one would talk. So I always had this sense that I had to be that glue, but I never wanted it, so I'd always push it away. So I think that I had really, really, I don't want to say good, but at the time, really clever short-term coping strategies. How do I get through the next day? How do I get through the next week? But no good long-term coping strategies. So my short-term game was really good. My long-term game, I was like, who needs that? I'm getting through till tomorrow. I don't need to worry about what happens in a year. So so my vision was very narrowed into what I had to do.
Let's go back to the isolation. So poor communication with your peers.
Yeah. So
how did that affect your sense of belonging?
I don't even know if it was. Yeah, didn't have one.
Yeah, exactly.
But hey, I mean, like jump forward to now, I can, let's say 10 years ago, I can make friends very quickly. I'm very personable, but I've had to rein that back. This is probably where the poor communication really came from. Just not having a similar peer group to constantly get feedback from and practice and trial and have errors and feel safe that I can make those errors again. So that's probably also where a lot of that anxiety came from in those next few years. So after those few months back in Sydney, that was the end of year 6. I can clearly remember some of the girls trying to ask me to the end of year dance. And I was like, well, there's no point because I'm going back to the blue from my mum anyway. So there was this like nihilistic, like there's no point. So just don't bother making friends by this point now. So anyway, we get back up to far north New South Wales. My mum's living in a different place now. She's living in the township. And we go to the main school, which is far more structured, but I'm an angry, confused, lost teenager at this point. Like so year 6 to year 7, what's that, like 11 or 12 years old? Like that's just before testosterone is going to start. So I remember year 7 being a little bit tricky. I got into a lot of trouble with a lot of teachers. I even remember picking on other people, but that's because my communication was so poor. That's the only way I could talk. And I can very clearly remember this one big guy that I was picking on. He grabbed my head and just smashed into the wall about 3 or 4 times before like the year 7, 8, and 12. The bigger kids came down and helped out. Yes, that's one of the multiple head injuries I sustained in my teenage years. That was, but that's why I can do the martial arts and judo now. And it's like, I'm like, it's fine. Just have some fun. So yeah, a lot of give and take with what I'd call bullying now. So we're in the township. I'm getting hungry. My mom doesn't have enough money to pay for us. It's my mom's off trying to make ends meet at different jobs. And I'm like, I'm already making my own lunch at this point. Like it's forming in a different way, getting in lots of trouble with the teachers. But the school was pretty cool. I mean, I got to do art class, and that was probably the first time I found some creative outlets. They had an agriculture class where we actually got to go and like dig and plant, and all the stuff that I'd seen while living in the rainforest, I got to actually create. And that's really where like my green thumb. I love being around plants. I'm not good at it. Don't get me wrong. I don't have time to be good at it, but I love being around nature and plants. Like my piece is looking. So some people have water and sand. Mine's greenery. You put me in the forest and I'm just zen. So I'm there for what, a year and a half until middle of year 8. And then this is in a township. I'm not going to name the township, but it's known for its drug use. Kind of used to be hippie, like everyone like smoking weed, love and peace. And then all of a sudden people started moving in and making money, and then needles started popping up everywhere. So it was still a bit of a community, but my mum started seeing some certain things around. And while she was not there in certain ways, because she was, and don't get me wrong, she was trying to make ends meet. She was trying her hardest. I have no blame, no negative feelings towards this. But there were certain things that weren't picked up on at certain points. But our safety always was. Because of my mom's upbringing, safety was always paramount. So when she started seeing needles around, she was like, all right, you're out of here. Go live with your dad again. So from year 8, middle of year 8, kind of towards the end of year 8, I was back down in Sydney. Just Sydney. And we're back. And that's kind of where I stayed since then.
Shall we move on to your early 20s?
So before that, like this is where I really noticed my communication skills were quite poor.
Yeah.
So I was now back in Sydney, year 8 until year 10 or 11, let's say halfway through year 10, I was jumping around from group to group. Groups didn't really want anything to do with me. New faces, old faces, a different high school, and mischief. Mostly the mischief was on this building. I was just destructive at this point and angry and like bubbling with testosterone, a teenager. And then around year 11, I found an outlet, and that was me signing up for the gym class. And my gym instructor was also the geography teacher. Who knew? And she gave me 2 compliments or statements of observation that I really took to heart. And one was that she thought that I had good proportions in my skeletal and muscle structure. And I was like, fantastic, let's move forward to this. But she also called everyone around me at one point and said to everyone, so this is what it looks like when you know how to push yourself really hard. So no one else in the gym was actually pushing themselves to fatigue. They were just getting on the machines, just pulling a little bit. I was that one that, again, aggression, testosterone, something as an outlet, finally. And I was just pulling on everything until fatigue, because it was just a way of me escaping how shit I felt. So I took that and I was like, oh, wow, someone said something positive about something I thought was a negative. Maybe. And then just that fleeting idea left. But then that built up again later. So it's all about these little fleeting things building over time. So that was where I started lifting weights. I started getting strong, and I started feeling very confident in my body and overshot. And then I started getting too confident. I started standing up to the bullies, and all of a sudden they stepped right back. And I was like, oh, okay, I've got something here. I then became the bully even more. Right. And that's something I regret a little bit, but I've spoken to those people. I've made amends. I've apologized for that. And I understand where it came from. So I'm comfortable with myself now. But at the time I was like, what the hell is this? So then this brings me up to about 19, right? So I've got a girlfriend now. I've had 2 relationships. I tended to go from one relationship to another relationship as quickly as possible. And it was probably in my mid-20s that I realized this. That was me trying to teach myself relationships. Is that I had enough, I wasn't aware of it, but I had enough introspection that I could go, hang on a second, that's missing. Let's do more of this. Maybe a few levels of control mechanisms in there as well, but
well, so it's because usually people see it as like a negative thing, jumping from person to person. But this is you sort of trying out what works, what doesn't. Like you're seeing it in a good way.
Yes.
Interesting.
But that was only like my mid-20s that I started looking back on that.
Yeah.
So it was potentially also a comfort thing. Like the more I could be with someone, the more safe I could feel, like I was supported in a way. So it's right around that point that I'm in the middle of a second relationship. First one was 6 months. This next one went for about 4 years. I liked her a lot. And then I also got into study. So this is when I jumped into tertiary study. This is where, like, now I've decided, well, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and then I wanted to do, I think I actually signed up to, apply to do physiotherapy at university, and then I never got in because I didn't have the marks. So I decided I'm going to go and jump into TAFE and do a personal training course. So at this point, I'm doing Cert 3 and Cert 4, juggling a relationship, trying to juggle friends, which isn't going well, drinking way too much at this point, party central. And then I finish up my Cert 4 in fitness. I go and start working a little bit. And then I realize I don't know enough and I want to go back for a diploma of fitness. But at this point, I also had a change in relationship. And this is one of those life's regrets. I did horrible things to at least one person and questionable things to another person in that change in relationships. And then all of my friends were just like, nope, bye. And I was like, all right, well, that's left me high and dry. And now I'm just with this new person, new relationship that is not healthy for me. So not only was I doing horrible things to my body, I was training almost like an athlete, not doing all the right stuff for my body and my mind. And I was drinking on top of that and poor relationship choices on top of that. And then chronic fatigue kicked in pretty hard. It first arose as like I think it was glandular fever. That's what the doctor said, but I don't remember ever having a proper diagnosis. And then it was just exhaustion after that. And then soon after that, I had 2 hernias. Yeah. So whether that was actual or not, probably from training too hard, the specialist told me that it was congenital as well. Then I had the surgery for that. So not only was I in a pretty bad place in my early 20s, now I had surgery and the surgeon kept giving me painkiller scripts. So I got hooked on painkillers for at least 6 to 12 months after that. I mean, it's crazy how much they just keep palming it off to you. And in hindsight, my pain was probably less to do with a biological surgery and healing after the first 6 to 12 weeks and far more to do with an emotional pain that's just way too easily masked through opioids.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that chronic fatigue continues for a little while. And then I get a little bit better. I decided I want to do a massage course now because I still don't know enough. That's probably one of my things. I never know enough. I always want to know more.
But how was all this like chronic fatigue affecting your academic pursuits and ability to study?
Pretty overwhelming, but I mean, it's probably the same thing as what that gym teacher told me is the mindset, right? Is that no matter how hard it gets, I just keep pushing and it's almost an outlet, right? And it was something that by that diploma of fitness, I had one teacher who really took a shining to me. And there always seemed to be some teacher that took a shining to me for something. So I always felt like there was something to keep pushing forward for. It was never like a slog uphill. So yeah, my health went downhill, but I kept achieving in academia. And I don't know how that worked, probably because I've been exercising for a while and it was something that I strongly identified with. So I did really well in that diploma of fitness. And then I think I had about a year off, maybe less than. I didn't work too much in that next year. Don't really remember that year, to be honest. And then the next year, so after that, I went and did a diploma of remedial massage. So I'm going through that. I finished that, smashed that as well. I find that I'm really good with my hands, really good with touch. People respond to me quite well in terms of being a clinician. I won't go to too much depth with that course because it's, yeah. And then after that, how long after? Pretty soon after that relationship ends that I was in. And I was distraught, but looking back, I shouldn't have been in that relationship. That was not a healthy relationship. That was 2 people with their own forms of trauma that were, again, I'm pretty sure the term now is trauma bonding, where you find someone not of the exact same trauma, but a similar level so that you can actually, the idea is that if you find someone with similar trauma levels, you can grow together. But I was trying to push and this person was not sure what they wanted to do, I believe. So that ended. And then within about, I'd say 6 months, I had a full-time job as a massage therapist. I started getting quite overweight, quite heavy, still fatigued. Started making some okay money for 23 though. And then I fell into this relationship with my current partner. And yeah, so she had her own levels of trauma, but probably not to the same extent that I did. But I felt like I had, I've only had this term recently, it felt like I had a leash on me before that. I don't know if that was self-imposed, most likely. And it felt like once I found this relationship, there was a reason to let go of that leash. And I just, my ability just came up and then I almost started overtaking. That caused its own problems in that relationship. right? So that causes own problems because I was suddenly pushing my own boundaries. So I should stop there with the relationship and talk about how I was pushing those boundaries so hard. So this is where and this is why I like to say all the relationships are good, because I always learned something from them. The previous relationship had taught me the values of psychology. So the moment that relationship ended, I had massive panic attacks, anxiety, depression. I was even put on, I didn't know it at the time, but I was put on anti-anxiety and antidepressants. I took them for like 2 weeks, and I was like, excuse my language, I was like, fuck this. This is not right. This is not good. And I went back to the doctor. I was like, no, I need something different. So he put me on to a psychologist. This psychologist has been very close to me ever since. I haven't seen this person for about maybe 2 years, but I've referred so many of my family and even clients onto this person. And yeah, I attribute a lot of my letting go of the leash to this one. And she specialized, of all things, in post-World War II European families who had migrated and lost their sense of identity. And yeah, right, really niche. But again, we're in the eastern suburbs, lots of money and lots of those people. So you can understand why that person existed. From there, it started with me going, oh, I have problems with the house, and I have problems with the dog, and I've got problems with my past relationship. And the therapist was like, what about your mum? And I was like, oh, we're going to go down that pathway, are we? Like real smart ass back. And now in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, so those years between my mum and my dad are really what formed these issues. But again, no blame to them. They were the filter that stopped all of their trauma passing down. I've seen other families where the parents didn't stop this trauma, and that all filtered down to the kids. Like if I got like arbitrary numbers, 5% of what they had, fantastic. They've done their job correctly. And it's not about what happened to me. It's about what I do moving forward now. So I consider this kind of my age of awakening with the psychology. So after maybe I only saw her 6 times in that year. I kept working. I kept building. And again, this is where it was coinciding with my relationship with my now wife. And she and even her family gave me so much, not support, but room to breathe, to learn, to figure it out on my own. So it was mine. It wasn't theirs that they gave to me, but they provided that safety net that I could just flourish. So this is where I started to learn the importance of values in life. So over the next few years, went on and off with the psychologist. My wife then realized that she's got anxiety as well, from different reasons. And then she started seeing the psychologist and moving onwards and upwards. And everything really changed when my psychologist put me onto the Stoics. Do you know much about Stoics?
Marcus Aurelius?
He's one of them.
I listened to a guy, Ryan Holiday, Stoicism.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, Stoicism. Yeah. So anyone else out there listening, look into Stoicism. It's fantastic. It's not about not engaging with your feelings. It's about not responding to them.
Okay.
You can have the choice of what you do after your feelings have slowed down. So you can have everything that's triggering in your face. You can stop for a minute. You don't have to react to them. You can just consider that, and you can move on. You can shelve something, and you can pick it up later. But anytime you've got a gut reaction to something, it's probably the wrong reaction.
Elaborate.
So if you're being triggered by something and you want to react right now,
okay,
that's probably the wrong thing to do. You need to take a step back, have a look at why you're reacting that way, and then analyze that and then move forward in another direction.
So it'd be good for really impulsive people.
Fantastic for impulsive people. I was an impulsive person. Now, every time that I get triggered, I mean, my mom triggers me quite quickly these days. However, she and I are now both at a point where we can say, we are both being triggered right now. Anything that we say is not exactly valid. We're going to hang up the phone and we're going to walk away for 10 minutes, and we'll message each other when we're feeling comfortable, and we'll come back to the story. And that has worked amazingly. So dialing back a little bit. So importance of values.
Wait. Let's talk about values then. The importance of values. Yeah. Which values? Give me 3. Give me a ballpark.
Oof, that's hard on it. Is so the importance of justice, being just in every single interaction you have. Not so what's right and what's wrong here. So not so much what's fair, but what's just. As my psychologist once said to me, if you brought this in front of a judge, how would that judge respond?
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of the questions I ask myself every time I'm triggered, is I dial it back and I say, from someone who's outside of this perspective, what would they say? Right? So, and I find that's the best way to be just with everything. Another one, continual growth. Don't stagnate. So every time that you feel like you've reached a ceiling, you've got to find another way to break through that ceiling. And that could be in many ways, emotional, financial, whatever it is.
Okay. I'm keen to wrap up your story and then I have some questions around it.
Of course. So where can I move on to from there? So after really coming to terms with who I am, I decided, I want to go to university and be a physiotherapist. I want to help people. And once I get into university, I didn't get into physiotherapy, but I got into exercise physiology. And then once I was there, I was like, holy crap, I think I can actually help people. I found a practice where I worked at for a couple of years. I'm now running my own practice. And I started really helping people over time, seeing really good outcomes. I found that I was really good at it. And then through that process, I found myself training with martial arts and training really heavy with weights and loving life and becoming quite successful in my own right. So
can we understand, because I don't think most people understand what exercise physiology is. I didn't before I did it. There's personal trainer, exercise physiologist. I mean, I've got chronic pain, right? You've helped me with chronic pain, but is that the main factor? Is that how is it different from a personal trainer? Maybe start with that.
So higher levels of education, a deeper understanding as to what's happening. A better scope of everything that's out in the field. So almost a removal of bias and an introduction of fact. And that fact is all based on the research. So statistic pretty much is what is going to give us the closest idea to what a fact is rather than an individual truth. Yeah. So one thing a client once said to me is a fact is dead. So it doesn't change. Truth is alive. It can change. Yeah. So my truth today might be different to my truth in 5 years, but the fact of something is that's how it is.
Yeah. Okay.
You can then have other information that comes to light that changes another fact in the future. But yeah, the fact right now is that we know that exercise is good for us, but I don't know you can always cut this part if you want, but we know for someone like yourself, and understanding the psychosocial aspect of our situation, our conditions is arguably a large component of the story when we're dealing with complex conditions. So we call this the biopsychosocial, and I can put those into ratios. So the biological is usually the smallest thing. So we can have biological problems in our bodies. We can have headaches. We can have back pain. We can have knee pain. But if you're in a positive psychosocial environment, that's quite manageable. If you're in a poor psychosocial environment, that becomes really unmanageable and really distressing over time, and that compounds. So that's the stuff that really comes in from an exercise physiology perspective. We see more of the whole person rather than how much that person's lifting and are they hitting all their dumbbell lifts or whatever it is. And that's why a lot of my sessions are based more around talking, giving the person rest to then go and lift.
I really want to just quickly get in, round this all up, because I find your moment of self-actualization, really compelling. I want to know how other people can reach their fullest potential, because it almost feels like it's out of our control. How it feels like you had the counseling and you had people around you and certain things that happen in your life to create that mindset. But I suppose what would you say to other people to, how can they reach their fullest potential?
How can you reach your fullest potential? Okay, so I'd say use the tools that we have right now.
Yeah.
So we have social media, right? And what we choose to put on social media will be reflected in the algorithm. I no longer have, I've got funny memes and funny videos that pop up all the time, which is fantastic, right? That's a nice little offset. But I try to avoid trash. If I see something that's trash, thumbs down, get rid of that. I won't spend too much time on it. I will like the Stoic pages. I will like the pages that give me my interests, the things that help me become that next level of person. So just today, I saw this one post that was thrown at me because of the algorithm on Stoicism. And it was do things like have good habits, sleep well, hydrate well, make sure you got your diet in check, limit how much alcohol you have, remove toxic people from your life. And that's probably the hardest one, right? Is we feel a connection to these toxic people. And sometimes we need to look at it through the lens of justice and go, should I be around this person? And it's a very hard thing to remove that. So we all know the answer, but the pathway to doing this is difficult. And at no point am I considering this pathway that I'm doing right now easy, and it's not getting easier. It's getting more difficult. But yeah, so use the tools that we've got right now, and that's social media. So don't let trash be thrown at you, and it will start throwing out what everyone else has done throughout history to what you can achieve. So just for you can jump back in. So the Stoics, one of the things I realized with the Stoics is that the problems that I have today and the problems that you have today and the problems that everyone has today, guess what? They were around 2,000 years ago. These are not new problems. These are not modern problems.
Just manifested differently.
Just manifested differently. These are the same problems. So if we can find those lessons throughout history that show us there is a way out, we just then need to follow the pathway. The other thing that my psychologist said is you need a guiding star. What is something that you're working towards? What's your long-term strategy? What is it that I see over there that goes, nothing around me matters because I'm moving towards that?
It's so interesting how someone in your position could develop a complete victimhood mentality and just be like, woe is me. Or you could respond the way you did and just, it's how we respond to our life circumstances that determine who we are, right? I just find it fascinating.
Not just that, but I'm also in a very affluent social environment.
Yes.
Right? So I'm not exactly out in the western suburbs of Sydney in a downtrodden area where my mates want to go and do stupid things and get drunk on the corner. So I'm in an environment where you're luck, but with the social media, again, I'm bringing it back to that. You can set up your own environment now. So there's a lot of it is choice. And hey, if someone wants to move into the eastern suburbs and then luck favors the prepared. If you're prepared and the opportunity rises in front of you, you will have luck. Luck doesn't happen to someone who's not prepared. So if someone really wants to be in a better social environment or a more affluent social environment, I'm not going to say the word better, you can go and work your ass off and rent here. It's just that you'll be working 16 hours a day. But guess what? Anyone here who owns their own property also works 16 hours a day by choice. No one's living it up in their lazy, comfortable life. No. It's work.
It's work.
It's work.
It's
mindset, constant attitude. Work.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, wow. I thank you so much for sharing your story. I thought that was really awesome. I feel like you offer some really good advice. And thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for listening to my story. I don't often get to have it recorded.
Oh, yeah, it's going out into the ether, so...
I really hope some people out there that have been through similar issues can take something from this and just start to little steps. I guess that is one thing that we can take from this. Little steps turn to big outcomes.
Totally, man. Totally. Thank you.
Thank you too.